Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us for the Future of Field Operations webinar. My name is Nicole Bamford, and I'm the moderator for today's session. On behalf of Leslie and the team, we thank you for joining us. This presentation will be given by Christian McDermott, Country Manager at Voovio Technologies, and Francis Montemuro, Director of Operations at Voovio Technologies. And their presentation promises to be well worth a listen. Before we get started, here's some quick administrative points. During the webinar, if you have questions for the presenters, please submit them into the Q&A box on your screen, and these will be answered during the question portion of the session. Likewise, for any technical issues, please write them into the Q&A box, and we'll get to them right away. The widgets on your screen can be resized and dragged around for your viewing preferences. So make sure you're sitting comfortably, and I'll now hand it over to Christian so we can begin.
Thank you. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our special webinar on the future of field operations. So we're going to look at how we can increase the reliability, availability, and productivity of field operators in manufacturing plants using a knowledge automation platform, which has been specifically designed for field operators. So we're going to take questions at the end. And for now, we'll get straight to it. So Francis Montemuro, our Director of Operations, he's been in manufacturing for over 30 years in many plant leadership roles and operations roles. And myself, Christian McDermott, I'm the North American coordinator for Voovio. And I'm going to be talking through the first few slides and then showing you a demo of the knowledge automation platform. So there's a lot of studies out there that dig into unplanned downtime losses in the process industries. And what's clear is that the financial impact is actually bigger than we think. So there are three little nuggets of data I want to draw your attention to here. ARC Advisory Group actually puts unplanned downtime losses in the process industries at around $1 trillion in lost production and revenues. Now, this is across all process industries in many regions, including oil and gas, chemicals, refining, pulp and paper, food and beverage, and so on. But let's look at the ASM consortium, the Abnormal Situation Management Consortium. They put the U.S. petrochemical industry losses at $10 to $20 billion a year. And this is actually where a lot of our Voovio customers are. And this seems valid because we know that there are regular events leading to unplanned downtime. For example, Storm Uri was the most recent one. But this is rare, thank goodness. But there are many examples of misoperation, equipment failure, environmental releases, incidents, product quality mishaps, and so on that actually happen fairly frequently. According to some more data from the ASM consortium and Honeywell, we know that a significant cause of process upsets is caused by people. We're human, we make mistakes. And when you actually look at equipment failure, the majority of the major contributor here is how we humans operate that equipment. And we know that a major root cause of misoperation is actually related to procedures. So that they're either not used, they are wrong, or they're not followed correctly. And this is where our webinar today will really focus on, how can plants improve that interaction with the equipment and the overall effectiveness of people who have to operate that equipment. So what's the solution? Well, we're going to show you a solution in a second, but let's remember, technology and automation will not solve this people problem we are talking about. Why? Because you cannot automate all field operator tasks. There have been studies done by McKinsey and others that over half of those tasks will still require people. And Francis will be able to relate to this slide very well here because he lived through, operations for 30 years and in plant leadership roles. The more we automate our processes and the more reliable our equipment is, the fewer opportunities to learn from experience exist. So the question is, how can we expose field operators to all the situations and procedures they may have to execute in such a way that they learn and know them? And how can we improve procedure quality, clarity, and adoption? You know, the industry has been very good at focusing on equipment reliability, availability and productivity of the assets. But what about the people? And this is where we're going to focus on. So I'm going to share my screen. So give me just 1 second. And we're going to talk about the knowledge automation platform. So I'll give it a couple of seconds so that my screen appears for all of you. And we're going to show you how you can have a knowledge automation platform for your field operators, starting with this. And this is a digital replica. So I'm sitting here remotely, logged into my laptop, and I'm going to start walking through the digital replica. And this is the basis of the system we're about to show and explain. It is a real plant environment, accessible on any screen, tablets, laptops, whatever. I'm using a mouse here to walk through a digital replica of a real plant. And the unique thing here is this is built using single images. So, it is photorealistic. It is a real representation of the plant. And you have the same degrees of freedom as you would in real life in terms of being able to walk around, navigate, and you'll see, interact with the equipment. So here you can turn corners, you can follow different pathways, you can even look around at any location. So you really have that immersive experience. And field operators or maintenance technicians, when they walk around the replica, they will see tagged pieces of equipment here. In this case, we've got valves and instruments, but you can also tag larger items like vessels, compressors, pumps. And you'll notice there's a label. When I hover the mouse over it, there's a label. And when we're in this detailed view, you get a very close-up view of that item. And importantly, we can also simulate the real functionality of that piece of equipment. In this case, it is a wheel valve, but there are tons of other things that can be replicated. Control panels, switches, lights going on and off, pressure gauges, hoses, bleeds, plugs, you name it. And a really important feature here for field operators and anyone in the plant environment is that all these items that are tagged are listed in a searchable index. So if you want to find, for example, a recirculation line, you can just type it into a search box up here and click on the item you want to find, and it will take you straight to that component. So operators can find things independently, regardless of their level of experience. And remember, this is accessible 24/7 on any device. So you no longer have to rely on those highly experienced SMEs for everything, for planning, for debriefing, and so forth. The other thing here that I want to highlight are what we call enhanced views. So these can be embedded in any part of the replica and really bring the equipment to life. You'll see these color-coded icons at the bottom, and you can toggle between them and activate them and turn them on and off. So here you'll see the lines, the flows have been activated. Taking that a step further, what is really popular are complex manifolds in this case. We can activate the flows and even the valves. So we now have interactive valves in this enhanced view. And this has a huge onboarding and refresher value. Again, any level of experience can benefit from this. And you'll see in the bottom right here, in the valve in the bottom right, which I can click on and open, you'll see that the flow now corresponds to the state of that valve. And you have an unambiguous view of a section of your real plant, which has huge value. So that's the digital replica. This is important because this is the basis of what we're going to continue showing. And that relates to how to operate equipment. Now, we touched on procedures. So procedures are a key part of this automation, knowledge automation platform in the form of these simulators. So what you're looking at now is a simulator, again, accessible on any device. On the screen, you have the digital replica on the right. You have a map at the bottom, so you can always see where you are. And on the left, you have a procedure, which is a PDF of, it could be a startup, a shutdown, equipment swap, lockout, tagout, you name it. And we can talk more about the types of procedures later in the questions. But let me point to this action checklist above the procedure. Now, this is really important because the process of creating these simulators, which is very straightforward, involves a line walk with the subject matter expert, the person that knows this procedure very well. We will walk through that procedure and identify every single action that we need to simulate and that an operator needs to perform. And that process provides incredible clarity to the procedures. An example is if your procedure says close all the drain valves, and there's 11 of them, but your procedure doesn't have that, we would have 11 separate items up here. And I know Fran's going to talk more about that in the following slides. So let me show you how this works. I'm going to execute the first couple of steps here. So you physically have to interact with the valves, confirm you've done the step, you've completed step 1, and the system now takes you to step 2. And you'll see there's a green arrow guiding you through the procedure. So it's very much like a virtual subject matter expert talking you through this procedure. Indeed, you even have these knowledge snippets that appear. In this case, it's a piece of text that tells me why this valve is always left open. But this is a knowledge capture and transfer tool where you can actually add videos, cautions, warnings, notes, other data which is important for this specific step. So knowledge snippets are very powerful to really enhance the knowledge and competency of operators across procedures. So I finished that step, and now it's going to walk me to the next step. So it's very much a self-paced guided simulator that is really designed for all levels of operators. However, it's a great onboarding tool, or if it's something, to review a startup procedure before you have to execute it in the field. We actually have some customers now using Voovio as they prepare to start up after Storm Uri. Unfortunately, a lot of plants in Texas and Louisiana had to shut down. So this actually enables them to be prepared and start up perfectly. But what about, we talked about now learning procedures and practicing them, but how about measuring the skills and competency of organizations for specific procedures? Now, this is a test simulator, and it's the same as I was showing you before, but the difference here is that you get immediate feedback on what you're doing correctly or incorrectly. So let me do the first step correctly. So I'm going to close this valve, and I'm pretty sure this is the right one, and I'm going to confirm. And you'll see on the left, I get immediate feedback saying action completed correctly. So what about making an error? So let me walk down to where we were earlier, and I'll interact with the same valve, and I'll crack this open, confirm, and you'll see I got immediate feedback again, real-time feedback with a piece of data here which shows me which valve I touched, which was the wrong one. Now, all of this data is really powerful, and this is, first of all, first of all, visible in the form of a report that the operator will see, and can, you can download it, but it's actually automatically saved in a cloud platform. And you'll see my record on this procedure. So very powerful. And Fran's going to talk more about the data that is actually analyzed and available in a kind of people dashboard later, which allows you to kind of reflect on and measure the skills and competency on specific procedures. So that's the procedure training part, learning and practicing and testing. But what about when you go into the field and you want to have that visual aid? So what you're looking at now is something you would have on a tablet or another sort of phone device. Very easy interface here. And this is all drawn directly from the simulators. So you have your action check step at the top, and you have an image drawn from the digital replica where you find this component or piece of equipment. And if you need to have a detailed view, you can toggle between the detailed view and the pathway view. So when you're in the field, you really have that verification, that visual verification that you're in the right place. You press the green checklist to move to step 2. And of course, you can access knowledge snippets as well in the field, incredibly valuable there. So there is also a note-taking capability, and you can utilize this. And again, all of this data is stored and captured in the cloud and is readily available and analyzed in the form of dashboards and reports. In this case, I'm just quickly going to show you the report that is pumped out at the end immediately with all the information of timestamps and notes and by whom it was completed. So very powerful tool. And with that, I would like to pass it back to Fran Montemuro, who's going to continue the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Christian. So let's talk about the benefits resulting from a Voovio project implementation. So some of the products and benefits that are realized with our customers, the first one that Christian spoke about was procedure clarity. And what this chart depicts is on the y-axis is the number of procedure steps in a given procedure or line items before and after a Voovio implementation. If I have you look at the second set of bars, when we went to the site for this procedure, there were 28 steps, procedure steps for the operator to go out and execute this procedure. Once we walked this particular procedure with the SME and detailed every executable action that the operator needed to perform, you can see the orange bar was well over 125 executable actions for the operator to perform. So the result is a very clear, concise, executable actions for the operator. There's no ambiguity with that procedure or any of these procedures following the implementation of Voovio. In addition, another benefit that our customers are realizing is improved competency over in a shorter amount of time. So what this chart depicts is competency on the y-axis, time on the x. The gray arrow shows what we find in most of the petrochemical and refinery sites: onboarding, orientation, job shadowing, and then some type of verification. With Voovio, the time to competency is accelerated. Productivity gains upwards of 50%. That results in less overtime, less costs associated with onboarding or qualifying that operator in the area. Why is that? Because operators can execute these procedures independent of the availability of an SME, practice, and then when ready, take a standardized test to document and show their competency. In addition, as Christian mentioned, there's the field execution tool. So we are seeing competency gains of 100% because they are practicing entire procedures. They don't have to wait for equipment to be down or to be available. Some additional products Christian mentioned relates to our automated dashboard. We are able to measure the competency of the operators of a shift of the entire organization by assigning them the modules, letting them practice, and let them demonstrate their competency on the procedures. And what you can see here is over time, the initial assessment, in this blue curve, very wide standard deviation, knowledge from low 50 test scores all the way up to 100%. So very typical organization. You have some operators on shifts that know the process, know the procedure very well, and others that do not. Once we give those operators, those organizations time to practice, we go back typically in about a month and reassess competency. And you can see in this green line to the right, a lot smaller standard deviation. So again, this automated dashboard available to the organization, it's a great tool for the learning and development leaders within the organization to understand where their organization is and where they need to get to. Along those lines, another tool that's available to the L&D managers or the ops managers is an assessment of where their organization, the shifts, are performing within a procedure. So what this depicts are those procedure steps that are commonly missed within the organization when executing. And it could be a number of reasons. It could be a misunderstanding of what that step is asking the operator to do, or it could be an example of practice not consistent with the procedure. But it's data that the L&D leader, the ops manager can use to then drive the organization to standard execution. So now I'd like to go over some case studies, some results that we've realized with our customers. I have 4 case studies, each one a little different. This first one has to do with a plant that supports a very large refinery. They provide different gas streams to the refinery. So reliability is of the utmost importance to this plant. And they were having issues. They were having 2 issues that they needed Voovio assistance with. One was onboarding. Plants located in the Gulf Coast, they were realizing high turnover, onboarding new operators, and the time to competency was too long for them. So that, in addition to some issues they were having with misoperation of the boiler feed water pumps, was causing unplanned downtime. So this organization was able to implement Voovio, use the Voovio simulation modules prior to execution, prior to working or starting up the boiler feed water pumps, and eliminate those unplanned events. In addition, they were able to use Voovio for onboarding the operators to decrease the time to get the competency and to qualify. The next example is a petrochemical plant producing nonwovens, and their challenge was related to executing the procedure in a standard manner and getting to first quality in a timely manner. Some of their challenges related to improper setup of the equipment prior to startup. Some of it was part of as they were starting up, not hitting the right process parameters, causing non-standard production, second quality production. So with Voovio, we were able to simulate this procedure, allow the operators to practice prior to startup, and then use the enhanced view tools as well as the field execution tool as they were starting up to ensure they started up on time and first quality. The next case study is related to a refinery. A refinery part of the unit was struggling getting their shutdowns, startups, equipment swaps, doing it in a way that they were not leaving valves or valves open or losing primary containment. So Voovio, what we did, the line walk process was significant in this case. We were able to go in there, walk this process with the SME, identify every actionable step associated with closing valves and isolating the process as the operator was executing the procedure to ensure there was no lost containment, loss of the process, causing those very high and costly releases resulting in the regulatory fines. And then the last case study is, it's a unique one where we are actually working with the refinery, our customer, and they are using Voovio to train the third-party trucking companies, training the actual truck drivers prior to those truck drivers arriving on site. So this has afforded a couple benefits to our customer. They can train these truck drivers prior to showing up on site. They become familiar with the operation at this specific site, as well as it minimizes the overtime required from our customer to train these truck drivers once they show up on site. These truck drivers are then familiar with the operation, and it has reduced their number of spills, number of equipment damage associated with loading the contents at the refinery, and it's caused a significant improvement in the asset reliability because they're no longer spending time cleaning up spills or repairing equipment. So with that, let's talk about implementing Voovio. A couple more slides. So Voovio, what's needed? We need SOPs. We need your procedures. They don't need to be reviewed. They don't need to be revised and gone through a procedure improvement or revision process. The Voovio line walk process completes that for our customers. So we will take whatever procedures exist, and our engineers will arrive on site and walk the procedures in their current condition and create those actionable steps and provide that procedure clarity. The time we need for that initial review, initial line walk process is typically 3 to 5 days. And then we only need a couple hours from that SME throughout the project cycle. A typical project takes us 12 to 14 weeks from the time of photo shoot to the time of project delivery. And when we deliver that project, it includes everything that Christian covered, as well as our ops team will work with the customer to ensure the adoption of the Voovio products, help them with the automation dashboard, and ensure that adoption occurs with our customer and be there to support the adoption. So as we talked about, Christian mentioned asset reliability. Huge focus over the last 10 to 15 years. Lots and lots of money has been invested with asset reliability. We're focusing on the operator. We're focusing on people reliability, the human reliability, and how that field operator interacts with the assets. We have coined that as the Voovio cycle. It's from the beginning of the operator showing up and onboarding, whether they're new to the facility or just transferred into a new unit. It is a more efficient onboarding, and then it's through the competency phase, whether it's initial competency or refreshing that competency prior to execution. Then they have the field execution tool as they're in the field executing that procedure. The field execution tool ensures accuracy. There's a picture of the component on the screen, and it eliminates any ambiguity on what component they should be actuating. And then, of course, requalification, recertification, a lot of PSM, a lot of regulatory covered sites. So again, the Voovio tool is a great tool. The assessment tool is a great tool for confirming and documenting the operator competency in part of that recertification process. So with that, I'll put up on the screen some feedback we've received from customers, and I believe we're ready for questions.
Great. Thank you, Fran. First question we have here, we'll get right started, is how do you make changes or updates?
Okay, so yeah, good question. As I mentioned, as any changes or updates to the procedures, our customers will be given an authoring tool or an updating tool that they can update their procedures and upload those changes, and the corresponding action steps will correlate with those changes. Any picture changes, the customer can take those simple picture changes and send them to us, and we will update the replica. Anything more significant, we would send our engineers to the site and make those updates. But updates take a couple of days, not weeks, not months, but just a couple of days to make those changes.
Great,
just
thank
to add
you.
To that, actually, sorry, Nicole. Just to add to that, yeah, just in the demo that I showed, it's built using single pictures. So it's not laser scanning, it's not 3D scanning or anything like that. It's we use a normal digital SLR camera. So we're talking about individual JPEGs that are not stitched together, and you can literally take one picture out and put a new one in. So the updating is really designed for the manufacturing environment.
Great, thank you. Next question is, what do you mean by knowledge automation platform? What data is collected? How is it automated?
Okay, Christian, I can answer that one. So the automation platform, what we're talking about there is the ability to capture the assessments from an operator and create those curves for the operator, for the organization, for the shift, so the learning and development manager understands the competency of the organization. That platform will also generate those commonly missed questions. And in addition, we collect the data from the field execution tool, when the action was executed, who executed it, so we can do analytics on the field execution. And coming out later this year, we're going to have a operator rounds function that will also have analytics associated with operator rounds. So it's a total platform looking at people execution and people reliability.
And it's really the first time we can measure competency objectively as well. I think is an important point.
Great, thank you. Next question is, how many procedures and what types of procedures are in a typical project?
Yeah, okay, I'll take this, Christian. Typical project, it really depends on the customer. We focus on we don't do a whole plant site at one time. We'll work with a unit and identify their business critical or what they define as critical need for their unit. And we can do 10 procedures, we can do 30 procedures, really what the customer needs at the time. And they can be procedures associated with a field operator. And we even have customers that will include the control room or DCS board operator procedures. So once we define the need, or once the customer defines the need, then we'll take those procedures and use those to create the project. And then once we complete the initial project, we can implement the next wave either within that unit or start going across the plant to the other units and leveraging the Voovio solution.
Great. Next question is, how long does it take to do line walks of procedures when you do the projects?
Shall I take this one, Fran, or do you want to take it?
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, very, very quick answer. It doesn't take long at all. Depending on the number of procedures we're doing in a typical project, which is totally up to each customer. We've got customers who want to do 5 procedures or 30. It really depends on the customer. So, but we walk through it, and average photo shoots at the moment are taking, 3 to 5 days. So it's not a lot of time, and we just need one subject matter expert who knows those procedures to be available to walk through them and guide our forward engineers. So the line walks are really powerful, and that's all the time we need to capture all the data we need.
Great, thank you. Next question is, what do you need to implement this system? How many resources does it take to implement Voovio?
Yeah.
Not a lot, but Fran, maybe you can add more to it.
Sure. Just we need the SME, and if there's a couple SMEs, that's fine. Someone to walk with the forward engineer and show them the accepted practice on site. We will, on occasion, engage with the right folks on site to get those whatever upgrades to the procedures. It may take a little bit of time for the SME to interact with the manager to get those approved. But as far as Voovio's interaction, the 3 to 5 days for the photo shoot, and then maybe a total of 2 days time throughout the project lifecycle. Just we have a couple product checks along the way to ensure the accuracy of the content. But I'd say 5 to 7 days of a resource over a 14-week period.
Great, thank you. Next question is, have customers used Voovio for remote/virtual training?
Yes. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, with site access restrictions and so forth, yes, we've had customers, use Voovio because it was the only tool available to have the field, on your screen, and be able to review and practice things before you have to execute. Unfortunately, hands-on training has been extremely limited, and so this is a great, enabler for that.
Yeah, Christian, just to add to that, we had customers also using it as a shift turnover tool and part of rack-up meetings where they could pull the replica up on the screen and share that over a Teams meeting with their resources, whether it's technical resources, support resources, and talk through problems they were having. We've also found over this past several months, the organizations are using Voovio to prep and get ready for turnarounds. They can walk through the replica and plan their turnarounds effectively by using the replica well in advance as the turnaround planners are trying to put the jobs together.
Exactly. That's a good point, Fran, because you can connect this, or we can connect Voovio to your calendar of interventions. So if you do have planned startups, or like now in Storm Uri, people can now practice and utilize their simulations to have an effective and hopefully faultless startup.
Great, thank you. Next question is, what's the number of operators that should be participating in average to make this solution break even, cost improvement?
I can start, Fran. Very few. When you look at this, obviously there are some onboarding and SME time savings and overtime savings dedicated to training. But actually the real payback is on reducing those unplanned events and increasing equipment reliability. And Fran had some case studies there, but some of those case studies have lots of operators and some of them have very, very few. So the answer is very few. I don't know if you want to add more to that, Fran.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it, Christian. It really gets down to the site, the unit, the business need and how to address that need. It could be, the case studies. Some of them were asset reliability, some related to unplanned downtime or unplanned loss of process, regulatory events. It could be related to onboarding operators due to high turnover. So yeah, the number of operators is probably not as significant as truly understanding the business need. And then once we understand that business need, and if it's 4 operators per shift, Voovio will help ensure the competency of those 4 operators to achieve that business solution and drive those either costs, asset uptime, or eliminate the unplanned events.
Great, thank you. Next question is, I see the benefit of plant-specific simulation, but do you have off-the-shelf generic simulations as well?
I can start this one. The whole technology is really designed for, plant-specific and equipment-specific simulations. But that said, we have customers that have done, scenarios, generic scenarios, using their equipment, for example, lockout, tagout training for onboarding new operators, or other scenarios where you have a piece of equipment and you can use that as an example, which is relevant for other sites. So yeah, in that sense, generic simulation works as well, but it's not necessarily off the shelf. That has to be customer specific or site specific. Fran, is there anything you want to add?
No, nothing to add. We really want to understand the unit, and then from the unit we can build generic, like you mentioned, lock, tag, try, confined space, whatever it may be. But really, it's unit, plant specific, and then from those projects, if we need to build something generic, we could.
Great, thank you. Next question is, how often are updates required annually?
Fran, do you want to take that one?
I mean, from a plant process standpoint, really, it's dependent on the unit. A lot of units go through an annual turnaround, and they may need to update the replica and or the procedure, once a year. But if they have changes throughout the year, it could be, there are no requirements. We could update it as often as the customer needs that update. Christian, I don't know if you want to talk about software, any updates that way.
In terms of like software updates, when we release new features and all of that, those are done seamlessly. We're constantly releasing new features based on customer feedback. But yeah, the updates really depends. Updating is very easy, and it's done on a very with a quick turnaround time. It's done hourly. And as Fran said, people can send us the new updated pictures, or we can send a local forward engineer in. So I don't know where the question is coming from, where they're based, but that really depends on their site.
Great, thank you. And we have time for one more question. So that question is, has any drilling contractor started to implement such automation on the field? Example, drilling, fluid mud system, etc.
We have I guess in terms of upstream, we're in talks with a lot of upstream companies. This has been very specific for downstream assets. But that said, upstream assets are very similar. there's lots of opportunities out there. So, I mean, we could take this offline and talk about it, whoever asked that question.
Great. So for all the questions that we didn't get to live today, not to worry, Christian and Francis will reach out to you individually and make sure your questions are all answered. In the meantime, thank you very much, Christian and Francis, for your interesting and informative webinar. For those in the audience, if you want to listen again, this webinar will be available on demand shortly. And finally, thank you to you, wherever you are, for taking the time to listen in on today's session. Remember to check out more of our upcoming and on-demand webinars at oilandgasiq.com. And again, thank you so much, Christian and Fran, for your time today.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.